It started as one of those perfect mornings you almost feel guilty about. The sun had just cleared the tree line, scattering golden light across the yard, and the air smelled like pine needles and the faint sweetness of wild clover. My cabin sat snug against the edge of the forest, where the sounds of wind through the trees mixed with the distant babble of the creek. I had a cup of coffee in one hand and a rake in the other, fully prepared to spend the day working on what I like to call controlled wilderness. To me, the yard's natural chaos wasn't a flaw. It was its charm. Clover patches for the bees, tall grass for the rabbits, and wildflowers that looked like they'd been painted there by accident. But to Karen, my next-door neighbor and self-declared guardian of HOA standards, it was the botanical equivalent of a crime scene. Karen's house wasn't just neat. It looked like a model home in a real estate brochure, right down to the unnervingly uniform flower beds and the lawn that could have doubled as AstroTurf. She had the uncanny ability to appear out of nowhere whenever anyone in the neighborhood dared to deviate from the HOA rulebook. So it wasn't surprising when I spotted her through the fence slats, standing at the perfect 45-degree angle that allowed her to see into my yard without technically trespassing. At first, I ignored her. I had work to do, and frankly, I wasn't in the mood to hear a lecture about property values while holding a hedge trimmer. But when I glanced up again, I noticed her posture, rigid spine, hand clutching her phone like a lifeline, lips moving in short bursts. She wasn't muttering to herself. She was reporting me. I didn't have to hear the words to guess the gist. "Yes, officer, there's an unkempt yard situation here. It's attracting wildlife. Yes, actual wildlife." I could practically see her emphasizing the word wildlife like it was code for feral wolves instead of the chickadees currently hopping through my bird bath. About 10 minutes later, I heard it, the faint but unmistakable wail of a siren in the distance. Now, I live far enough from town that you don't hear sirens unless something serious is happening. My first thought was there's no way she actually called the police. My second thought, as the sound grew louder, was, oh, she totally called the police. By the time the patrol car rolled up the gravel road toward my cabin, Karen had migrated to her driveway, arms folded in smug anticipation like she was waiting for the grand finale of a fireworks show. I'll admit part of me was annoyed. Wasting an officer's time over a yard was ridiculous, but another part of me felt a little mischievous. I knew exactly what was in my shed, and I knew exactly how Karen would react to it. Still, I played it cool. I kept raking leaves, pretending I hadn't noticed the car pull up, while Karen made a beeline toward the officer, launching into what I could only assume was her dramatic retelling of my environmental lawlessness. From my spot near the oak tree, I could hear snippets. "Not in compliance, attracting pests, looks abandoned." Her voice carried the same energy as a courtroom prosecutor delivering a closing argument, except her jury was a single, slightly bemused police officer with mirrored sunglasses and a notepad. I couldn't help but smile into my rake handle. I had a feeling this was about to get very interesting. The officer glanced from Karen's pristine lawn to my cabin yard, eyebrows lifting just slightly. He didn't see crime. He saw tall grass, wildflowers, and a couple of squirrels bickering over an acorn. If he was expecting a hazardous situation, it clearly wasn't here. I set my rake down and walked toward them, deliberately taking my time. In one hand, I carried what I just pulled from my shed, a gleaming green and gold plaque mounted on a cedar board. The bold letters across the top read, "Certified Wildlife Habitat, National Wildlife Federation." Karen stopped mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open like a car door that had been left ajar. The officer tilted his head, a small grin forming as I held the plaque up for him to see. "Morning, officer," I said, as casually as if we were meeting at the grocery store. "I think I can clear this up. This isn't neglect. It's by design. My property is officially registered as a wildlife habitat. Native plants, food sources for pollinators, shelter for small animals, all legal, all intentional." The officer took the plaque from me, running his thumb across the embossed lettering. "Well, I'll be," he said. "I've seen a few of these before. They're part of a conservation program." He turned to Karen, his mirrored lenses reflecting her pinched expression. "Ma'am, nothing here violates the law. In fact, this setup is encouraged in a lot of communities for environmental benefits." Karen blinked like she'd just been told gravity wasn't real. But the grass is above regulation height," she sputtered. "The HOA says The HOA can have its own rules, the officer interrupted politely, but they don't override state environmental guidelines, and they definitely don't override property rights, especially when the owner's participating in a recognized conservation program. This, he said, gesturing toward my yard, is protected. I could almost hear the gears grinding in Karen's head as she processed the fact that she had summoned law enforcement only to discover that I was not a criminal, but some sort of legally sanctioned nature steward. She stood frozen, jaw tight, arms locked across her chest. I decided to twist a knife, just a little. "Oh, and Karen?" I said, with my friendliest smile. The Federation sends out a quarterly newsletter to other habitat owners. Sometimes they feature yards from different regions. I might just send them a few photos of mine. Imagine our neighborhood in a national publication. The officer chuckled under his breath. "Well, looks like you've got everything in order here," he said, handing back the plaque. "Sorry. Enjoy your Saturday." "Thanks, officer," I replied, tucking the plaque under my arm. "I always do." As he walked back to his cruiser, Karen's phone hung uselessly at her side. She looked like someone who had trained for a victory lap only to find out the race had been canceled. Without another word, she turned on her heel and marched up her driveway, muttering something that sounded suspiciously like, "We'll see about this." I went back to my yard work, whistling. The bees buzzed, the rabbits grazed, and the sun kept shining. My controlled wilderness was here to stay, and now, thanks to a shiny little plaque and one very confused Karen, it had the full blessing of the law.